Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Creative Thinking. My name is Miguel Valenzuela, and today we have a very special guest for you. Her name is Diana Molina, and she is the creative director for Juntos Art Association. But first, I want to start off by talking a little bit about creativity and why it's important. I read this the other day, and it stated that creativity is a way for an individual to show their soul to the world. And I believe that that's a very big part of us opening up and thinking in different ways. So having said that, I want to introduce everybody to Diana Molina. Hi, Diana, how are you?
Hi, Miguel. Great to be here with you.
Oh, I'm glad that you could make it, and I'm glad that we had an opportunity to get a little bit of insight on who you are as an individual. So as you know, and as we've been talking, this show is mostly directed towards the idea of thinking outside the box, creative thinking. So I wanted you to fill us in a little bit about who you are, where you started, where you were born maybe, how you started thinking outside the box and being creative. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
That's a big question to unpack. Well, it started for me in the Segundo Barrio, where I spent my early years. My grandparents, Angel and Elvira Cerecedes, had a corner, a botica there. And
which is a pharmacy, right?
Well, they provided, medicines, not exactly a pharmacy, but medicines. It had a ice cream counter.
Oh, nice.
It had, just general sundries that people needed. And so my stool I say my stool at that counter was my first provided my first great insights to, border crossings, comings and goings, and the creative juices that were provided to me in that environment. With my grandmother was an opera singer, my grandfather a musician. That's actually how they met.
Wow.
He was took his band in the back of a horse-pulled trailer at that point to Chamberino, to a picnic, and was singing. That's where they met.
Wow, really?
And they weren't able to have children, so they adopted my mother.
Interesting.
And so she ended up right there. She became the first Fiesta de las Flores. So it was very vibrant.
There's a lot of history there. When you were a child, do you think that you were influenced by your mother as well? And if she did, how did she do that?
No, well, it was just, like I said, a very, very creative environment with costumes for everything. All of them had, my mother with her, as has always been in costuming as my grandmother, and sewing. And so actually one of my first creative pieces was I'd take the scraps from my grandmother and mother's sewing
when
projects.
They were making something.
Exactly,
and then what did you do with them?
I made a little quilt, with the squares and pieces.
And was that something that sparked creativity for you from the beginning, and then you kind of pushed that into what you do today?
I feel that, creative thinking, creative expression above all, begins in our home and everyday life. It's just how we choose to live our life.
How do you think that that's important, or why do you think that that's important?
Well, it just, opens the door to different ways of viewing matters and understanding and looking at it from different perspectives.
And that's important, right?
One of my first projects was a photography project, just walking home from school, taking photographs of different trees during the seasons.
This was a school project that you took photographs and then you displayed them somewhere?
No, I just invented it for myself.
So that in itself is creativity, right?
So I love project-based, efforts.
Absolutely, which is very important. It's always good to incorporate different elements and different aspects, and maybe even work with other people. So when you were in El Paso, did you end up moving somewhere else, or did you stay here for a while when you were in your teens, maybe early 20s? What did you end up doing after that?
Well, I'll tell you, since childhood, I would travel. At 10, I begged and pleaded to get on a trip to Washington, D.C. for a cousin's wedding. So I got to see the Smithsonian, just that opened tremendous doors. And, I was 10 years old, but I said, I'll be the navigator, I'll help how I can. Then at 13, a trip deep into Mexico, also seeing the art and architecture, culture. So when the quinceañera came around, I decided to take a trip to Europe instead with my tia Becky that was going to fly there to see my cousin Stella. So I had a month in Europe seeing the museums and the culture, and that was mind-boggling. We talk about, thinking outside of
opening
the
up
cocoon.
A new world, right?
Exactly.
So
then I worked for IBM, excuse me but I
No, go
went
ahead.
to work for IBM. That was also a new dimension of thinking at that time.
And that is still here in El Paso.
No, then I went to study at UT Austin, and that was in the School of Natural Science. So it was a Bachelor of Arts, but a lot of science, technology, engineering, because I was studying computer science, but they
Wow.
fit it in that because it was something new.
Right.
No, so after that I went to work for IBM, traveled a lot with IBM, lived in North Carolina, and this was all in automation, robotics, in the early stages.
So you've led a pretty exciting life.
It's been very interesting.
One of the things that you told me is that you actually went back to Europe, and once you were in Europe, you actually did a lot. I want you to give us a little bit of background on how you got there, why you got there, and what types of things you did. You say that you worked in photography and you wrote some articles for some pretty impressive magazines, right?
Well, I'll tell you, it directly ties with out of the box because I felt too caged in my IBM laboratory situation. So at a certain point, I just quit and went to Europe for a year, traveling, then decided to stay.
How long were you over there?
Ultimately, I was there 10 years. 1 year
Wow.
in southern Spain, in Andalusia, and 9 years in Amsterdam.
And what kinds of things did you do? Did you exhibit in museums, other than the magazines, which we'll talk about a little bit, but explain all of that to us.
Well, I jumped into creating feature stories for the magazines.
Maybe a few names?
Elle, Vogue, Marie Claire, that did long feature stories. Geo, which is the European version of National Geographic, also National Geographic in photographs, but creating, both the photography but the feature stories. And
so you did both?
Right, but it's all about the real estate on walls and in magazines and in books. I would aim for feature stories because I could go more in depth, into a particular investigation. So I started a project about the Tarahumara. That was one of the stories, which I have ties to my own roots here and my great-grandmother. And
that goes back down to when you were young, no?
The influences and yes, hearing the stories, also that goes back to the roots. So I went on a trip with my brother Ray down to the Sierra Madre and began a project there of in-depth storytelling about the Tarahumara.
And that went in one of the magazines?
That went in several magazines.
Very nice.
And featured. And then that led to my very first exhibit at the World Museum of Art in Rotterdam, because I lived right across the street from the Stedelijk Museum of Modern Art. I mean, literally out the door. So that was, art. I just believe art is one of those avenues for expansion,
creativity,
expansion, right? and thinking, expanding one's boundaries.
I think also that's very important. But when you were in Europe, do you think that the catalyst was when you were small and having the influence of having the opportunity to go to Europe when you were, you said 13 or 15? Is that what sparked the creative aspect to that?
Well, like I say, I believe it begins at the home and the books we read and all those different measures we can take, whether taking a painting class. For me, it was going to the museums, going to see the art, going on the journey itself, that opens dimensions. It all feeds into what we are in the here and now and where we take it.
Absolutely, which reminds me, when I was young, my dad used to always take us to all kinds of museums, but they were mostly historical. And when I was younger, I was bored to death. But I remember seeing all of those little tiny details in little sculptures or paintings of the historical elements that were there. And that, I think, for me anyways, is the catalyst that helped me become the person who I am. So once you were in Europe, you decided to stay there 10 years, and you talked about a few of the magazines that you were in. When you were over there for the 10 years, did you eventually come back? How did you end up in El Paso again?
Well, I had various factors pull me back, among them, family, the roots, like I say, with the roots, the wide open skies, my connection with the Tarahumara, and just feeling like I had one leg there, one leg here, because it was very difficult to take the winters, the cold winters. And so came back and now just connected in this borderland area, did a lot more on the Tarahumara, but then changed the direction of the exhibits because I didn't have the easy access to, because I was working in different countries, and that was all before the email and internet and so on, but I was working, out of, for magazines across Europe, so came here and kind of basically reinvented and started preparing traveling exhibits of my Tarahumara work, for example, another one, Entre Fronteras, and about the Virgen de Guadalupe in contemporary context, and different traveling exhibits, and that have traveled to museums within the region and outside of the region. So it's the same as feature stories, but packaging them in a way that goes on the walls instead of the pages.
And do you think that starting off with magazines kind of drove you into lifting it off of the magazine pages and then beginning to make artwork? Was that something that helped you, or was that more of something that restricted you?
No, well, it had a direct connection, because I went across the street in Amsterdam to photograph the director of the Stedelijk Museum for GQ magazine. It was an assignment.
Oh, nice.
So I met him. We were talking about Marfa because he had a connection over here with the
really?
Shinati Foundation that he'd traveled to.
How much closer to home can you get, right?
Right. So then I decided, before I moved away, I said, well, I'm going to pop in and see what they think about my photography, my art. So I met with the curator, and she said, well, we could include a piece or two here, but I'm going to introduce you to the curator for the World Museum of Art. And then when I met her, she said a whole show. So it was literally the magazine assignment that led to that meeting and the first exhibit. So that was, a great place to start, and then began here with the Centennial Museum, worked with them several times, and then just other museums, like I said, art museums, science museums. Right now I'm hoping to work with a particular regional history museum with the art for the Juntos Art Association, the icons and symbols of the Borderland project.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I want to talk about. The creative people that live in our region have now become part of Juntos Art Association. Can you name a few of the artists? Can you talk a little bit about some of the artwork that they have, the types of kind of interesting, new, and innovative ideas that they have? Fill us in on all of that, because I'm sure there's a lot of information there.
You've got to see the show every time. You've seen it a few times, but it changes every time. It started at the Centennial. Icons and symbols of the Borderland, that covers the environment, which makes us, we're unique in this environment. Then the La Frontera, the infrastructure of our surroundings, and right now very much in the conversation, national conversation, of course. Then the food and drink, which is the basic, connection to our environment and the earth, and the sacred and profane, also with that. And the different perspectives of, and it's always changing in count, but approximately 25, 30 artists from the Juntos Art Association that are in El Paso, where the organization had its origins in the 1980s, and across the border states where we have other artists.
Yes, because you're not just focusing in El Paso, right? Now we have people from San Antonio, Phoenix, Arizona, places like that.
Brownsville, San Diego, but primarily in Texas and New Mexico. So,
And on one of my prior shows, we talked a little bit about the influence by people that are not from the place that you were from. How do you think that that's important? Talking to somebody from Phoenix that might have different ideas, or somebody from San Antonio that might bring in something, pull something new in. How is that, and why is it important for us to keep our eyes open and our ears open in reference to that?
well, like Alex Macias, right on the furthest corner there of in the Brownsville area. You know, he has that perspective of what's happening there, and his take on it from through his medium. Cesar Martinez, who grew up in Laredo and also spends time here. He has that wider perspective of that comes with history and being part of the original Chicano art movement, and there on the ground as it was happening. So bringing that, then there are artists like Gaspar Enriquez, who's one of the original members of the Juntos Art Association, that brings that carry through. And then new artist, Davinia Mirabal, that's also in the group now, Romy Hawkins, and just some of them are original to the group, and some have been added as we develop the exhibit.
And what do you have planned in the future? Well, first of all, let's talk about your artwork, because we have a beautiful piece right here. So let's talk a little bit about this. When you create your works of art, how do you get to this point? What is it made of? What are the materials? And what's the catalyst to making something like this?
Well, this is one of the pieces in the show. And this is, you know, there are different times we have to think beyond our
norm, maybe?
Our norm, our possibilities. So I'd been a photographer, and some years back, I had a car accident actually right off the airway exit here. I was rear-ended.
So a car accident somehow led to this?
A car accident.
Tell us.
A car accident. So I couldn't carry the camera equipment, and I was just, you know, impacted physically.
Okay.
So part of my therapy was creating these collages from pura basura.
Wow.
100%.
Because these are labels,
recycled.
right?
This is all candy wrappers, beer bottle labels, and I create sarapes, you know, and that.
Yes,
so talk
those are
about
beautiful.
the childhood influence and the cultural influence, regional, and also sarapes. You know, at the end, tapestries. They cross many cultures. So this is in this contemporary use of our wrappings to the foods we eat, the drinks we consume.
So it's very connected to a lot of things as well.
Yes, and the binational, you know, bicultural experience as well. But it's a tangible, you know, blending, if you will, of what we discard and what we consume.
Absolutely.
Taking a new dimension.
Very, very good.
So.
You mentioned also two cultures. We live on the border, obviously, here in El Paso. We have both the Mexican culture and American culture kind of coming together. Do you think that either one of those cultures or both cultures influence one another in any way?
Undoubtedly, undoubtedly. I mean, you can't, you know, some people speak about cultural appropriation. Well, that's going on, you know, that's an entire weave that we are. You know, we have different ideas, different experiences, you know, and that's, you know, through art, that just has that vehicle of communicating our very unique composition, you know, sometimes complicated, sometimes just the essence of it, you know, that shows who we are. At the end, one of the pieces in the show, for example, by Wopo Halep, she's one of my, you know, one of the first artists that I knew while I was still in the science field. And she's done many public art pieces. Well, there's a piece of hers in the show called Rio Grande. And it just shows the flow of the water beginning in Colorado, south, going through the arid New Mexico, and then down at this curve and to Brownsville and the Gulf. And, you know, just in that powerful piece, you know, we see that that connection of the environment again that impacts our culture and our traditions and our food and spiritual connections as well.
Of course, spiritual connections. We've been focusing on creativity. What does the future hold for you as far as creativity? What has brought you to that point? What is going to push you on to the next level?
Well,
because I know you got a lot of stuff going on all the time.
There's a lot of
You're
there's
very,
a lot
very busy.
there's a lot of balancing in it.
Right.
And it's a very very exciting time with the many opportunities that are coming up. The icons, I'll stay with the icons and symbols of the Borderland project that will continue touring in the next years. But I'm excited to say I was a presenter at the National Historic Preservation Conference, the Past Forward, over a year ago, and I had the senior editor from a publisher introduce herself. So that has led to a book about the project.
That's exciting.
So, yes, it's very, very exciting, and that'll be out at the end of this year, I believe, with Schiffer Press. And so that is, we'll show the artwork. It's going to be a coffee table book, and hopefully I can visit again when that is out.
Yeah, that would be
show
fantastic.
It to you, you know.
So one of the things that you mentioned a moment ago and that I found very interesting is how you said, I was a presenter. From that presentation, through the creative thinking, all of these creative juices going on, it forced you into another thing, which was creating a book. Do you think that that's something that happens a lot through many avenues, or do you think it's kind of focused on the art world? In other words, is it only about creating artwork, or can I be creative in the way that I make food every day, in the way that I dress every day, in the way that I think every day? What do you think?
Well, I think they're all interconnected. I mean, it begins again with how we connect with our environment. That begins with food. So and how you go the fabric that you use for your clothes, your surroundings, and that connection that I feel we need a stronger connection to. Another project that is, like I said, very near and dear to my heart is the Raramuri, the Tarahumara.
Right.
And I have an exhibit coming up at the Carlsbad Museum and Art Center at the beginning of June for 4 months.
Wow.
And it is run the super athletes of the Sierra Madre. And that culture has just, I mean, it is so connected to the natural way of being, the healthy way of being. They're and it's tied with movement. It's tied with what we eat. And so that is, that's, it's not in this certain arc. I mean, you aim for artistic presentation, but they can also be, it's photography. Some of it is sometimes a documentary approach. At the end of the day, it's how you put a body of work together, and then that distribution. They created, a catalog was created of that.
And I've seen that. That's a beautiful, beautiful presentation with lots of photographs. Once again, every time that I speak with all of my guests, we talk about creativity. When you think back in retrospect from when you were a child and you started to think outside the box, I will do whatever I can to go out on a trip and expand my mind. Do you think that that's something that everybody should incorporate into their lives? And if so, how do they do that?
Well, I think we all find our ways that work for us. I mean, it might be dancing. I love dancing personally. My mother, for example, that is her art form still at the age of 81.
Wow, really? I did not know that.
Yes. So, with some, it's just making things, and so everybody has their skill set or their, I'm going to say, passion. And one of the best how shall I say, ways to open that door to go outside the box and enter creativity is really following your passion. If you follow your passion and not there's always distraction. Placing a focus on that, even placing it every day if you can.
Right.
That's the ideal.
So the focus that you've had from a child, was that just being creative, or just allowing these creative juices to flow whichever way they could? For example, through photography, through travel, through writing, through artwork? And do you think that most people do that, or do you think that most people don't do that, in your opinion?
Well, I can't speak for other people, because I try to surround myself with as many who are, who are.
It's exciting, right?
Yes, and so I learned from every artist I have exchange with, and every everyone I work with in the process. Sometimes you encounter glitches and challenge, but for me it begins with defining a project that you are interested in, or a message that you want to convey, and having the flexibility that it alters and evolves. But as a matter of fact, even in my teaching, I have individually and with the group project-based teaching of developing, whether it be an exhibit, or in the case of Juntos, we have border visions, outreach with the particular audience in developing a body of work. We have the Save the Wildlife Art and Ecology Project that also translates, or connects, I should say, at each venue that exhibit is presented. And so that helps to move other people's creative juices, and tied to this, messaging or project.
Absolutely, and I think that it's very, very important for everybody to open up. And one of the main reasons why I started this show is because I did find that a lot of my students, I teach at the community college, I teach art appreciation, they often think that they're not very creative. Do you think that that is true, or do you think that they just don't know their creativity?
No, I think that's the exciting thing, that we can all just, tap into the inner creativity and all the potential that it holds in store. I mean, let's begin with you. I met you through an art exhibit that was at the El Paso Museum of Art, El Paso artists from 1960 to present, and brought you in, invited you to join the Juntos effort.
Which has been very exciting for me. It really has. We've done so many things together. I think it's very interesting that through creativity, we've been able to expand kind of the realm of what we started by talking within the group, and then starting to do exhibits, and now publishing, and so on and so forth.
And don't forget the giant rattlesnake puppet project that we worked on.
Oh yes, that was beautiful too. So Diana, you do a lot of work with the community, and I think it's very exciting because you do a lot of work with the community through children. And I think that that's where we need to really start to grow all of this. Do you have anything coming up that is going to be connected to children? And also maybe you can tell us a little bit about how we can connect with you. Do you have Facebook? Do you have a telephone number where people can get in contact with you?
Well, I believe the telephone would be the best. I do have Facebook, but sometimes for my focus, I avoid too much computer time, to be honest. So
how do they get a hold of you? Tell us. Which phone number can they contact you with? Do you do works that are sold to individuals, private collections?
Yes, absolutely. Have different collectors of the photography and collages, and the phone number is 915-526-3526.
Well, with that, Diana, we're going to end the show. I want to thank you very much for coming down and talking to us, talking a little bit about creativity, talking a little bit about your work and all the things that you've done. And I want to close by saying that we need to keep our minds open. We need to focus on being creative, because that's really what's going to pull us out of that box. Thank you very much. We'll see you guys next time.